Hello, everyone. Today's episode is a very interesting episode because I will kind of be looking at an idea that's very uncommon. I am kind of claiming in this episode that there's a kind of unacknowledged archetype. What is an archetype? Let's consider that human beings in history evolved to the point of tribalism. As they entered tribes, people got a sense of each other's individuality and, in some sense, a sort of reference for what is a norm. And then people's minds began kind of visualizing the mythological, considering it, you know? And I find this very interesting because it seems like at some point this creature on this planet is considering an abstraction of itself. How can I tell you? To motivate its existence. That means kind of like a non-physical process is leading to your physical decisions. And this non-physical process has to do with memory, and memory has to do with what kind of life you live in and what you're exposed to. And archetypes are kind of like the various, how can I tell you, like the various. Okay, here, there's you got to look at Carl Jung for his interpretation of archetypes, and then in this talk, I'm speaking about my grasp of what I felt Carl Jung meant by archetypes. But archetypes, they have a certain position. It is in some sense like the first idea. Like if you think of like evil, that image of a person doing that thing, that like the kind of character that word brings into your mind, that's like an archetype. Okay, it is either a surface archetype or there's more to it. You can say an archetype is like the first. How can I? What's a nice saying? A way of kind of defining an archetype. You know, I'm going to read you a dictionary definition of it. It says a primitive mental image inherited from the earliest human ancestors and supposed to be present in the collective unconscious. Okay? This is kind of like a dictionary Jungian definition of archetype, you know. Now, kind of what I'm saying, the archetype of the rebel, the eternal rebel of truth, where I'm going, why I found this idea to be interesting to share, is because when we realize that our destinies or our fate or wherever we're going to end up is based on the idea we have of ourselves, but then we see the idea we have of ourselves is hovering among many different ideas. A person can see many ways, just like a person, let's say, who has enough resources can see many different careers they can enter. Similarly, the mind sees many different senses of self. So these different senses of self, they're archetypes, because anything that comes into your attention is in some sense I'll say mind for now, but in some sense I consider mind to not have a location. It is a bridge. It is a bridge from the known to the unknown. So that means I have theorized often that imagination is in some sense an empty word. Okay. And how do I explain this? The image you have of yourself defines your ability, your capability. So imagine this situation where there is a soldier on a battlefield. Imagine in World War II, the soldier's just scared holding the gun and he's like, I don't want to go out, I don't want to go out, And then Somebody comes up, like another comrade of the soldier while they're in the trenches, comes up to him and says, hey man, if we lose here, they're going to capture the country and like take over or something. And suddenly the person suddenly gets a new sense of himself. He's like, oh my god, if I don't fight now, many else will be, for example, hurt. So the guy runs into the battle. So you see, it's like suddenly there was an archetype, there was an image shift. The way the guy saw himself was giving him a certain amount of ability, and then the way he began to see himself also gave him a different set of ability. So we see our ability in some sense comes from ourself. And the reason I say archetype, because it's like you, when you look at evolution, it's as if we are evolving to something else. As if it's some kind of a road trip where we are going somewhere, we don't know per se where, but there's a certain consideration of a destination we're heading. As if when you drive a car, you're looking out the front window and seeing so much in the distance before the actual points you get to. So that's kind of what I'm saying. What I'm saying, that if we consider there to be some sort of evolutionary intelligence, this evolutionary intelligence can't be separated from the intelligence of everything that exists in one moment. Because how we value life suggests this. In some sense, I didn't realize this until years later, but I got clues and hints. The moment I was introduced to mathematics, I kind of understood all of psychology. Right? And some people are going to be like, Mr. Within, what do you mean? What do you mean you understood all the psychology? What, like here, whenever I learned the number system, now there's different, in mathematics, there's different number sets. But I'm saying, just like, forget those settings, those, and kind of like, when I realized that there is the number 0, then there's the number 1, then there's the number 2, then there's the number 3, and then there's the number 4, and I'll stop here. I kind of understood how the ego, how thoughts are being me. Do you understand? And what I mean by that is that right now, as I'm speaking, the listener, if you think of yourself as very complex and sophisticated, in whatever direction, good or bad, you are in some sense putting a blindfold on. Because how can I tell you? It's like, you got to understand, language is sculpting the image of yourself. Every moment you hear a word, there's an evocation of image. I have tried to stop this, but I realize it's just how our minds work. If you go up to someone and tell them, don't think about apples, that person's going to think about apples. If you tell them, think about apples, that person's not going to think about apples. And so so we see that the mind cannot ignore what it receives, but it is interpreting what it is receiving. Do you understand? You realize there's something, that doesn't need a story about your intelligence of your moment of being, And so the archetype of the eternal rebel is kind of this very profound implication, that it is kind of on the levels in regards to narrative of a certain prophetic level, but not a prophet. So, for example, we see the idea of, like, for example, here. The archetype of the mother, the archetype of the father, the archetype of the warrior, the archetype of the joker, all these different archetypes, okay? But the archetype of the eternal rebel of truth is just this idea I have, and honestly was inspired out of this science fiction novel I'm writing, But it's like, there's this scene where, how can I say this? A being's form. Okay, a being is pushed, okay, towards a defeat, a personal defeat. But when that being realizes that his personal defeat is going to imply the defeat of his species, a unique power emerges. So for me, believe it or not, your energy level is based on your vision and inspiration. It's based on inspirational vision. But when I say inspirational, not like kind of like boxing motivation, push harder, hit harder, don't stop. Not like, we're not trying to make people into like, just a blind foot on a gas pedal of a very advanced car, moving fast, into chaos. Like, we got to be careful. So for me, I'm realized, okay, it was survival of the fittest. How were the fittest surviving? It was through adjustments. So any human being who can, before learning any other skill, learn the most important skill of how to actually readjust. And you gain readjustment through being able to entertain a different archetype as yourself. I am a person who some people think I'm like, it's very hilarious. Religious people feel I'm not like religious, you know, and okay, how can I tell you? And the opposite of the spectrum feels like, how can I tell you? I am right now, kind of like, I've gone to the to Buddha's barber. What I mean by that is that the path I'm implying is one where, before we live our lives for some program that seems to be better than nothing, we first realize that we can press the reset button. And our attention in the moment is the governor of our thoughts. It is the governor of our being. So my existence and my awareness is based on how much I am aware of. Do you know? The world that I see. There's days I've had where I've been tired and I've kind of been receiving. It's as if the phone signal was weak that day. There's been times where I've been energetic where it's been the opposite. I've had moments where, honestly, it's kind of starts off like this, where the inspiration of synchronicity guides you towards a sort of mystically sincere solitude. In that moment of silence and aloneness with yourself, you first time living with your own speed of life. This is something many people don't comprehend. That when I say living with your own speed of life, what I mean by that is like, you begin to realize that your attention is creating who you are. Oh, there we go. You understand this. You kind of understand, in my opinion, existence. You understand that existence the way we as a species for now comprehend it is as a character in a story. Like, I'm Mr. Within, you're some other person. And we're just going about on our day and all this, right? But I'm saying, like, we got to be able to realize we are social creatures, but we're also able to not be. And the world must pay its effort, and in some sense try to create some global network that advances communication. Because I believe communication is one of the most important tools for peace, a sort of peace of a co-creation. So you see, the problem is you don't have to go try to fight chaos, and it's not like you have to always tame order. Do you see? It's as if, like, after some point, you wonder what is the meaning of it. And you realize the meaning of it is how able your attention is to realize what it is. For me, mysticism and enlightenment is a Rubik's Cube that few have solved. And the reason they have solved it is because they have been able to look beyond themselves. Do you see? And that's the crazy thing. A lot of people think spirituality is just like the way Westerners engage with yoga. And of course, I should be careful for my word choice because, like, the way a lot of people in the West engage yoga, not everybody, a lot of people though, is that they are using it as a costume, as a social costume. And that's fine. That serves its own purpose. But I'm saying true spirituality has nothing to do with ideas. And that's savage. It is a chaotic moment where silence allows your ego not to be able to be anything. And then you kind of realize your true nature because you have always been it. You realize in every birthday, of your life, there has been a you inside, a sense of being inside within you that has been changelessly observing change. It has been changelessly shifting different archetypes in your mind's view. For me, what is more valuable than a castle of luxury, what is more valuable to me than that is to be a participant of a sort of multidimensional renaissance that it occurs. And I say participant because it is when I use the word multidimensional, that means there is a part of our intelligence that acknowledges its limits. So you kind of look at the fingers on your hand and you're like, oh my God, 5 different fingers, 5 different dimensions are kept by a totally different dimension of design. Do you see? So what I'm saying is that you begin having like a sort of multidimensional relationship with thought and abstraction. And you begin to realize that something like I honestly wish when I was a kid somebody would tell me, is that they never told me train your attention. Because the secrets of truth are within your attention. The eternal rebel suddenly realizes that there is something to live for that doesn't need to unnecessarily be erased. You see, we find our values and then we live for them because they design us. Because how you value things suggests how you receive things. And so I'm saying there's an intelligence within the being, call it consciousness, call it soul, call it Atman, call it, whatever you like to, your higher self or whatever. Like this, as if materiality is the effect of a immaterial cause, of an immaterial dimension. You see, this is something that none of us thought, but I think Mr. Within right now can very easily say it, and I hope somehow people hear this idea and comment on it, because there's no point of being quiet in a temporary world. There's no point of not being free in a temporary world. Because the world is temporary, we as human beings know, oh my God, we're not going to be here all the time. So what do we use time for? And then there comes the great question, why do we create time to even use it? And we use it for a cause. And so we got to wonder if there's a part of us that is an eternal dimension, in some sense playing around physically in a material dimension. What is the purpose? Why does God need to have creatures? Why does God need to create to be God? Do you see? And what I mean by this is not like I never dare throw a spear that breaks the sky. But I will suggest that the system can be updated. There's been many times I've just felt like I'll say it, and I hope the listener, you somehow find the right ears to hear what I'm going to say, you know. But I've had personal moments where I was in nature and I was just alone, and by nature I mean like a local park. And I was just there, by a stream just a moment and kind of like standing. And then for a moment, I just closed my eyes and I felt like I was having a dialogue with the with what I can say was what I felt for me, the voice that is simulating existence. I felt like the programmer was talking to the program, something like that. And so in that moment, I was alone. I wasn't even saying anything. I was just silent. My eyes were closed. And in my mind, I was living this vision of an interaction, and so all of this is, you can consider it imagination, what I consider imagination, and an unnecessary angle, So let me just to judge, but anyways. So what I'm saying, guys, is that in that moment, I felt like the universe was, I felt like something was happening that was not just me, So I felt like in that moment, it's as if a different sense of myself was, in some sense, handling my moment, right? So what I mean by that is, like, I don't see, honestly, like I'm telling you, like, after you pass the language threshold, you cannot, right? So if there's a sort of mystical, let us say in quotations, truth, a sort of, let's say like this in quotations, mystical truth, this mystical truth of everything seems to be beyond language. And so we can play word games all we want, and word games, that's another way of saying, like, when we become through foolish decisions, it becomes war games. Honestly, tell me, every human being I find innately knows this, that war occurs through miscommunication or through greed. These are the two reasons, that war occurs. And greed is unstoppable, as if like the universe, like our species has not evolved. We're a young species. We haven't evolved to a point where we're like, okay, let's push aside personal greed and develop, a collective efficient system. So what that means is, like, imagine like a boat, and there's people on this boat, and the boat suddenly sinks and people are swimming to the shore. At least there's, in that example, at least there's a shore those people are swimming to. But for human beings, we don't have that island of greater, of that is a system of greater advancement, right? I want, like, how can I tell you, I think that human beings should invest all their attention, if they are in society, to try to create networks of communication. So we got to understand, it doesn't matter how people speak, it doesn't matter what people say, it matters what they're trying to communicate. And that is found in their whole communication, not just a part of it. So journalists, for all, from the beginning of time, have been trying to extract the truth from a segment, but not realizing the segment is uh, uh, being, in some sense, spiced up by their own interpretations and prejudice of what the truth should be. Do you see? So the thing about human beings is that it's too much randomity. It's too much randomity. And this randomity can be maintained to some degree, and at some degree it cannot. You know? So we can say that humanity's purpose is to advance humanity. And
What does the word advancement means that human beings, if they just start making more efficient decisions that are helpful towards, for now there's no collective system. Let me not lie to you. There is no, that we do not have an enlightened society yet. We don't have an enlightened political and social system yet. And when I say enlightened, that means one that acknowledges a sort of non-dualistic perspective. Do you know? That means a recognition that your senses are a sort of antenna of what you make of it that you receive. So this is the incredible thing, right? So right now as I'm speaking, like I realize, yeah, like I can move my physical body, I can speak, I can say words, I can generate ideas, but there's a lot of factors that I don't control. Like right now, I'm not thinking about how to breathe, but it's occurring. Do you see? So it's as if like nature is this roller coaster ride that we're on, right? And we're opening our eyes and we're realizing, wow, there's a relationship of our individualism with our collectivism. And when that moment arrives, where all individual activities and all cosmic activities are in some sense inseparable to a being that no longer needs duality to function, because let me tell you, you got to say it like this: immortality and eternity are two different concepts. The only thing they share, if trying to put an image to it, is a sort of infinite continuation. That's it. Right? That means emptiness is infinitely continuing from the start, and a shape that is kind of in a changing material universe, if it becomes immortal, it just be a changing shape for the rest of its life. It just be eyes in change, you know? Because the eyes of a changing universe is the response of the teacher in the greatest mirror of truth. The eternal rebel of truth his ego has been destroyed, has been defeated. But what is it that suddenly is the inspiration? You know? And it is a vision. That's what I'm telling you. People are so busy buying products and becoming a civilization that is just consumerist. And I can't deny it. Like I am right now, I'm drinking iced tea that I bought. So, but I'm saying, like, what if there's a better way? What if there's a better way that humanity can exist in this moment? You know? What if we realize we're not just 8 billion overpopulated bodies? We are 8 billion minds. We are 8 billion moments of unique attention to the world with our unique interpretation. And if people stop trying to fit in, maybe they realize that they have to fit in a new world in their perspective. They have to open their eyes to the world in a different way. That is a sort of rebellion, because there's external rebellions and there's internal rebellions. And internal rebellions is very incredible. It's a roar of a realization that you have been associating with a memory. That means like the moment somebody talks to you and your attention is based on a sort of how you were a person in a certain memory, that person will speak and you will receive little of it. And this is something they don't teach children. At the same time, it's not mandatory, because when everybody has free will, nothing should be mandatory. But we got to also realize we're trying to this science project. After 4 billion years, there's an opportunity for these creatures, called human beings, to some degree change, to do something. That means my greatest inspiration is not some image of value, is not some sort of grasp of luxury, future luxury. It is a realization of an ultimate harmony. I want to see it as long as I'm in material form, you know? That means when I was younger, I would pray for things that I wanted. I would pray. It's hilarious kind of when I think of it, but it was also sincere at the moment. So I felt like a lot of it was occurring, you know? I prayed for, like, my grades to be good, for a lot of pains and sort of problems to go away, But there came a time where I couldn't pray. Not because there was nothing to pray for, not because I was rejecting some idea. No, it was because I stood silent in front of an intelligent universe that is beyond my individual comprehension. Humility makes you silent. That silence is honestly something where you stop wanting things and you become a sort of giver of your new self to the world. But this giver of your new self is not ideological, so it's very important, again, how you're hearing me when I say this. But for the eternal rebel, it is how the world's responsibility becomes the person's responsibility, because the person is an extension of the world. As if existence was responsible to allow DNA, your DNA, to, like, allow you to be you, and now you're allowing existence to be itself. So you see, that's the beautiful thing, because there's different speeds. The way we record images and we remember things, that speed is different. So what that means is we have to be beyond the material dimension, thus rendering the validity of of an unknown soul, but what it implies is that we see cracks in our knowledge, and then, rather than becoming a person seeking a belief, you become a believer that as you trust your moment, the right things come to you. Like, this is an incredible thing. I don't know how many people vibe with what I'm saying right now, but you become a sort of mystical rebel. But you are rebelling against your ego. One hand is trying to, in some sense, let go, trying to make that grip let go. It's a contradiction, because you feel as a social creature you're responsible to have an ego, but at the same time, if there is more to you, why just be limited to an idea of yourself? This is why Mr.Within is saying, you're not an idea, and you're not your emotions, and you're not thought, and you're not anything that language can shape. You are the closest thing that language can come to is a presence of an awareness, and this awareness, the moment it contacts the material universe, there is a story there. It is as if like a network, like a wire is connected, and suddenly a network is established. So in some sense, the idea that we are simulating ourselves from a different dimension of existence is very valid. In some sense, we can't say 100% that there's a world behind the world or within the world. What we can say is that we at least know that language is the world that our free will chooses to entertain meaning in. But what if there are experiences that there haven't been words for yet written? What if, like, think about not just all the greatest books that were written in the past, think about all the greatest books in the future that will be written. All the new angles of perception that will be shared. Imagine a civilization that has already attained its greatness and is wondering what it wants to do after its greatness. This is the way where this is like kind of like how I felt like in certain moments I've kind of naturally remembered it. That means if you're a Buddhist listening to me, you'd probably think this is something I bring with me into this life, from another life. But I'll tell you it like this, right? So guys, instead, when people ask me about failure, I mean, sometimes I've said it's feedback, but my honest opinion is that it doesn't exist. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why failure doesn't exist. Imagine you just lost like a, marathon, Let me tell you why failure doesn't exist. Because there's this alternative way of interpreting the same situation, where instead of you thinking, oh my God, am I gonna fail, or oh my God, am I gonna succeed? You instead think, oh my God, I've succeeded. Oh my God, what am I going to do after that success? And when you begin thinking what you're going to do after the task ahead, as if you've already done that task and thinking what the next thing is, that task becomes incredibly easier and karmically occurs, right? So it has to do with how you feel that your ability can be directed. And it is directed by a sort of honesty, where honesty kind of makes you stop running. It makes you take off the blindfold. That's it. You know, it doesn't mean you have to always be honest and be like a saint that never lies or something. I don't believe in language personally, right? I think language is generating every story is kept in language, as if there was a projection of a movie on a wall, like those old school projectors, right? Language would be the color seen on that screen. Do you see? And the shape seen on that screen. And the whole thing could be said to be your ego, but we see the whole projection is on a wall, which is like empty space. So that means something is projecting and producing a simulation of a self in absolute emptiness. And what is it? So the greatest proof that there's divinity, suddenly becomes our own existence, because the prophet has become the mirror. And because the mirror reminds you that there is something within your eyes that is more than atoms. It is more than the elements. You are a divine opportunity and a sort of, believe it or not, alien when other species look at humanity. They're like, oh my God, like, what are those buildings? You know, probably a lot of animals were like, what? So that's the thing, right? And self-glorification, it only can be accepted when it's done by your natural self. Whenever you're dishonest, you'll see people can give you something and you feel like you don't need it. You know, guilty people suddenly become immensely charitable. The reason is because the ego is trying to readjust itself. But believe it or not, there have been civilizations where some of the greatest language, not okay. Here, let me let me rephrase. Like it was a silent civilization where there was a sort of a telepathy through not just body language in that village or community, but there was a sort of understanding and appreciation for existence in general and all of it. There was a sort of graceful vision of the big picture of what all this is, that kind of quiet village continued, you know and so for me, how can I tell you honestly, like, I was debating if I want to speak about the archetype of the eternal rebel of truth, or if I want to talk about a sort of you know a sort of how different systems evolve together. Okay, I was kind of thinking about which one to speak about, but now I'm in the vibe of both, so I'm gonna just go with it. But anyways, the notion is that, what is the purpose of a multidimensional being if there are other dimensions? And we see that the purpose cannot be just decided based on what is revealed in one dimension, so the purpose becomes unknown. So similarly, we're in a situation where we look at life and we're like, oh my God, it's so huge. We can't see the end of it. It's so big, And the thing is, based on that mentality, we allow our ego to change. So the ego sees the inevitability of its desire to know everything, right? And in some sense hovers in a sort of purgatory of not knowing. That means the person doesn't know if the person is a thought or if the person is something else. Do you see? So your relationship with your thoughts best occurs through a sort of mastery. A sort of mastery of you observing how your presence is being, the moment. How, if all those people running to look for their mind don't realize how the mind is being what they're looking for, you know?
And pretty much meditation, the reason solitude and isolation was crucial was because when you stop trying altogether, you kind of become like your nature of being, how you're being a person, suddenly becomes like how ripples on a pond settle. And when they settle, suddenly there is no desire. There's no even desire for enlightenment. There's no thought. It's just this, for the first time, you're being with the world pre-thought, prior to any thought. And in that moment, it's so incredible, because when you get to that moment, you begin to laugh. You begin to laugh that all those synchronicities that you saw, there's a lot of people who see synchronicities and they feel there's some sort of guidance in their life, some invisible guidance, you know. And let me tell you, you'll suddenly realize you have been the god of your thoughts. And you will laugh because you will see you don't know the unknown. And suddenly you'll realize, then what's the point of knowledge? And you understand the concept of playfulness. That means the universe was never meant to be a sort of complex truth to be figured out. It was more of a sort of playful growth of what many different of systems of intelligence. That means we are occurring at the same time as the cosmos, and there's significance in that. And the rebel of truth comprehends this, comprehends that the moment there's a better way of the world being in a certain way, the rebel cannot be stopped, because a better sight has been seen. As if like you can't get a glimpse of paradise and not want to kind of seek it, right? Do you see? It's same with success. You can't taste success and kind of like be content with and break their inspiration. Have an animalistic way when it comes to thinking about getting work done and the effort you're gonna be. Like, think of a surviving animal. Like, it has to fight. It has to try to, it'll die at its last breath, right? So the animalistic aspect of you, align it with the passion, with the passion of your, in some sense, greater intelligence, more organized intelligence. That means you're not just an animal, you are a being that realizes it is more than an animal, simply said. And by realizing it's more than an animal, it is. You know? The greatest inspiration is that once you get bored of just living for yourself, you'll live for your civilization. And you're living for your civilization doesn't mean you have to have a certain belief or a certain agenda or doctrine. It means a sort of playful, efficient advancement. So Mr. Within is saying to people, instead of all kind of running out and being believers of different systems of thought, I'm telling you, have your guards up. Dear listeners, don't believe anything. Rather, try to kind of find yourself in a manner. Don't even believe what I say. Kind of the only thing to take away from it is just that you got to self-reflect. You got to become self-aware. And self-awareness means that, in some sense, how is your awareness being yourself? And once you tap into that, you kind of, just like how some writers find their writer's voice, and they just endlessly can write about whatever they want. Similarly, the person kind of finds their real self. And their real self has nothing to do with any sort of image of a self, because the self is the watcher of images. That means if life seems like a movie to you, that means there's something watching that movie that is not in the movie. Do you see? The same fascination that we find when in a video game violence is okay, but outside a video game it's not. Do you see? So anyways, the archetype of the eternal rebel of truth is pretty much some guy. It's just some guy who's realized like the being is eternal, and in some sense is endlessly moving towards a cause that abides by a sort of universal justice, intuitive justice. Another concept I want to also share before I end this off. You see, we are creatures that have a sort of fighting spirit innately. All of us to different extents. This fighting spirit, once it asks itself what it's fighting for, will realize as social creatures is fighting for a better way of existing. And a better way of existing means a more also exciting way of existing, because you could be in a sort of utopia and be like, oh man, this is boring. This is no way to live. You know? So we see we need to have the chaos and we need to have the order, but rather than having each chaos and order destroy themselves, we need to have them in some sense play with one another. And what that means is we take violence more towards the digital and more towards a sort of where it doesn't have physical consequences. You know, that means instead of countries going to war, why don't they play a video game? And whoever wins the video game, you know, is going to become like this. But when I say plays a video game, that means their president plays a video game. You know, so imagine like, you know. Trump and you know, that fellow from North Korea are playing like a video game in a video game where it's kind of like Call of Duty, where they're like soldiers and stuff, and so many soldiers are dying, you know, like based on each member's army. So they simulate in the video game the army, you know, supplies and exact damage ratios that the army's military's weapons are have, and so the two people play this video game, the simulated video game of war. You know, and so violence, instead of being an external thing, is taken into an inner realm of a sort of digital you know, it doesn't influence anything, it's just happening in a game. You know, so if when presidents play video games, that's a step towards, you know, peace on earth. You know. Man, I have something to say, some extremely, you know, ridiculous and hilarious things here on this podcast. You know, I remember one time saying this idea where I was like, I hope the UN's listening, you know. And in that I said that all the presidents of all the different countries should once meet at the UN with pajamas in comfortable couches, you know, where they have coffee and everything, and just in a very, you know, in that environment, speak about the same policies rather in tight suits and ties and all this stuff, you know. And the reason is because nobody can really be angry. You can't take anybody's anger seriously when they're in their pajamas, you know. You know, so this way that reduces the chance of conflict at the UN if everybody's in their pajamas, you know, at night, you know. They're just tired and they want to come to conclusions. So, you know, have you seen that moment where there's students like in a study group that's kind of late at night, like the whole day they've been in a study group and they're tired at night, but at the end of the night everybody's mind is kind of like, you know, just honestly trying to contribute, you know, because something needs to get done, but at the same time nobody's serious or gets angry. Right? So the context shifts the concept's destiny, you know, the concepts, how the concept is received, right? And multidimensionality will come across to the person as a sort of um, segmentation of the idea of yourself, but then you'll kind of get a revelation in how thought is even present, and all of it will change. You realize the teacher you have been looking for outside of yourself, or the truth you have been looking for outside of yourself, you have been generating that storyline. And you'll be like, oh my God, how can I believe myself anymore? And when you get that to that point where you're like, how can I believe myself? You suddenly realize, what about the self? What self is struggling? Where is this suffering and struggling self that the Buddha was speaking about? You know, because after some point, you kind of, your mind abides by its true nature, and you have, your mastery is based on natural rhythm. This is an incredible concept, you know, because it's the same in martial arts. That martial arts guy who suddenly beat up a lot of people, he wasn't in his mind like, I'm gonna beat all these guys up. No, he was in some sense in a playful garden in his mind, You know, he was in some sort of peaceful place where for the greatest warriors, war was like play, you know. So for the struggling self, suddenly like the playful self reminds it that in playfulness there can be no harsh outcome, because that's the way that you know, that sense of self kind of goes across, you know, if I can say that, right? Um, I want to see what's a good story to share. I'm going to share this very fascinating Zen story, and you know, the main characters in this Zen story here. This is the story. There's a warlord. This warlord comes into incredible power, and he decides he doesn't like the monks, and he commands all the monks to be killed, to be executed. You know, and as he does this, you know, as he gives this command, suddenly a lot of monasteries are burnt and monks are killed, and monks begin fleeing towards the mountains. So pretty much they all begin running away, you know, to the mountains. And then as the warlord goes to this one town, you know, he suddenly begins to see like a monk sitting on the grass. Actually, I gave away that part too early. Okay, here. This is what happens, right? The warlord is walking. You know, he's seeing this agenda of his kind of go forth, and suddenly one of his generals comes up to him and he says, "There's a man. There's a monk at a temple, and we tell him, you know, we're gonna kill you. You know, get out of here. You know." And the guy says, "No." He's not moving, and because he's an old person, none of the young soldiers, you know, want to kill him. You know, something like that. I don't know. You know, so the warlord's like, okay, take me to him. You know, the warlord gets angry. They go to see that one monk that's kind of stood back, and think of the eternal rebel of truth as I say this. You know, this one monk is sitting there. You know, the general in front of his army, the warlord in front of everybody who's around there, his general and everybody's right hand man. You know, he's there, and he walks up to the monk and he says, "Monk, stand up." You know, and the monk stands up, right? And so this warlord, he's holding like his sword, like before he's unsheathed it, is like he's holding his sword with such an angry grip, you know, as if he's about to like, you know, like kill this guy, kill this monk, you know. And he looks at the monk and he says, "Do you know who I am? I can have my sword in your stomach in an instant." And there's this incredible silence, and all his you know, army and everybody behind him is just staring at this like intense situation, you know. The monk, after a pause, everybody's looking at the monk, looks at the warlord as if like unchanged, as if like nothing happened after the warlord said that, and he says, "Do you know who I am?" And there's a pause, and the monk says, I can have I can have your sword in my stomach in an instant." And suddenly, you know, this guy realizes that this being is looking at this guy and telling him, you can't do anything. I've seen the ultimate, you know? I'm eternal, you know? I've like something he implies an eternal truth. And so the story ends there, right? I don't know what happens. He probably gets executed. But in that moment, that warlord in his mind, there's just this incredible, like, eye-opening situation that you can conquer a world, but there's greater worlds. So is conquering the point? Is greed the point when it's too vast to make a fixed decision like that? And you know, there was a time where I was honestly super emotional about the outcome of the human species, like the destiny of humanity. There was a point where I would get super emotional, right? Because it was honestly like this complex way where I was like, where is it heading, society? And I realize it's kind of being drowned in a sort of facade. And in that facade, there's truth too,
but the truth is not that open. That means in society, believe it or not, every human being is a liar. They are a liar to anyone who gets convinced that who they are in that moment is them, when every person is a changing being. That means people who I knew a couple years ago, if I reunite with them and meet them now, I am a totally different being. They are a totally different being. Just like how our bodies change, the idea of who we are and how we see things based on who we think we are, and not just based on who we think we are or who we know ourselves as, or what we know ourselves as. It's like it's very important to consider this. So this is the end of the talk. But if there's any questions, anybody wants to comment about anything they heard in this talk, you know, uh, it's a good time to chat. So Q&A is open. You know. While we wait, if anybody wants to ask anything, I'm gonna kind of explain to you why I chose this picture in the back. You know. Okay. Thanks. Sun-wise, you know, that's a very interesting, very interesting way of seeing it. Thanks. You have an interesting name too, First Lady of Light. Okay. So does that mean a light is a sort of you see a personality to light, or is it suggesting a sort of angelic imagery? The name you have, First Lady of Light, or are you referring to like a celestial presidency? That'd be interesting. Yeah. Hmm. Um, First of all, thanks for engaging in the chat. I wanted to ask you a question. Maybe it'd be interesting. What do you think about this idea that there's a sort of archetype of uh, this image of self that, because it has realized like there's something more, it endlessly has power to just continue? Like, what do you think of that kind of idea? Here, this is an easier way of saying it. Do you see an eternity to truth? So while you respond, when I saw this image, I got a sense of how just like a person might be in the shade, but there's the sun. Just like there's a cold temperature, there's a warmer temperature. One can say there's different ways of being. Yeah, I like your comment where you say yes, and we're all just pieces finding our way back.
Very true. But the thing is, like, where are we going as pieces, right? And so, how do we? What is the way back, right? So I had this theory that, in some sense, like, and it's not just me. I speak about it in a certain way. Terence McKenna speaks about it in a different way. Terence McKenna says there's this transcendental attractor, something like that. I say, like, your mind is kind of coming from the future to the present. Your body is going from the past to the present. You know, something like that. So for me, the mind is living in a more advanced world. The idea of self and the mind is living in a more advanced world than just my physical body when I look in the mirror. So behind my eyes, my experiences of is like it has a different intensity than how when I look at my in the mirror. I'm like, okay, that's just me. You know. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I agree with that answer. Yeah. Yeah. There's no way as all is all. Yeah, that's I agree with that. But then there's also this factor of a sort of responsibility for the species ego to continue because it's necessary to some degree. You know, there's that too. So think of it this way, yeah, there is no way as all is all, but this all is manifesting itself in a unique way. And we have a choice as a conscious being to engage with it or not engage with it. For example, a fox can't come and contribute to physics, but a child being born in the human species can go contribute to physics. But the all is also, in some sense, manifesting a sort of way where individually it comes across as your creation. You know. So I became playful with language when I realized I can't own anything if I'm temporary. So if I'm going to die, what's going to remain? And these words are going to remain. But do these words belong to me? No, I'm just a sort of attention that is trying to keep alive certain concepts in the collective conscious, not just the collective unconscious. Because, it's kind of like when you ask about purpose and meaning of life. Yeah, every moment is intention. That's yeah, you're saying some very nice things. Yeah, and that intention, I think, starts off being conditional, but then it becomes unconditional. So when it becomes unconditional, that means there's no assumption of a past and a future to interrupt your performance in the moment. You kind of become a sort of, how there's a sort of Zen archery or Zen tea drinking ceremonies, where if you ask them, so what do you guys do when you drink tea? And they'll be like, nothing. you know? So, yeah, it's interesting. First Lady of Light, like, when you say every moment is intention, I'll tell you something interesting. The more deeper the more we try to contemplate the unknown, the less language becomes accurate. Okay, so eventually people like if I because I'll tell you like I have a I have a brother and he constantly like challenges my viewpoints, you know, and not constantly, but there's been moments where he's challenged my viewpoints, and in those moments we reach a point where we just realize it's unknown. That means we're thinking very directly, so deeply about something that we just realize we don't know beyond that point, right? So that's what I can call, like, personally, like, there's no word for it out there, I think, but I think like I'm kind of giving a word to the concept, but it's called the language threshold, right? And this is something I'm also writing about, that the limitations of language, if it is acknowledged as a technology, and also that human beings disengage with thinking that words and concepts can define them, right? So that's where I'm coming from and looking at this, right? So this is why I entertain the concept of, like, you know the person is from the stars and all this stuff, right? Like this like there's a community of people who kind of feel like, they're extraterrestrial beings and stuff. Like it was very interesting when I first like saw that community and something, online. I was just watching it. I never went anywhere to some degree, but like, and kind of where I'm going with this is that you 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 stop using technology that doesn't give you the results. Yeah, that playfulness is divinity. And have you heard this idea, like they say in certain religious circles, like I've asked people, like not that I've asked, it's kind of come up, and I've kind of like heard them, right? And what's kind of happened is that they say, like, when children die, they don't go to heaven or hell, because they didn't know any better, right? So a very young child who doesn't know even what it is, there's no consequence attached to that person, right? And so you see children, and when a child plays, like if you go ask the child, who are you right now? The child like will be like, get away from me, I want to just play, The child has no verbal answer because the intensity and the engagement of that moment is superior to concepts. Right? So playfulness is a sort of pre-thought and pre-language kind of situation. And if you realize that you only get depressed, there's different kinds of guilt. There's a story-based guilt, and there's a non-story-based guilt. A story-based guilt is like based on how you feel, and a non-story based is based on how you see something in the world feels, based on something you've done. It's like one's more direct, one is indirect, you know. But yeah, so playfulness is honestly like, in my earlier talks I was emphasizing it a lot when I first began, but it's very crucial. I find genius blooms kind of from playfulness. When you're playful, your mind is is like you're being more, rather than a body that's howling a mind around. You become a mind that's being a body, right? And I find all those people who kind of are running towards psychedelic experiences, they want to get a glimpse of being something more than they are, so they're seeking. But playfulness is the key, because in playfulness is when you get, in some sense, access. You get access to truth because you're not trying to be something, and the moment you try, you're lying to yourself. And I'm not saying this in a sort of like, like a CEO shouldn't go say this to, like, its employees, let's say. But yeah, so yeah, stay playful. I'll tell you something. We're talking about the word play, and I was thinking like of Beethoven's last words before he died. And his words are like, applaud my friends, the comedy is over. And his way of thinking is very similar to how in ancient Vedic culture they saw life as a lila, as a play of elements, you know, and society as a sort of theater, because the theater, the play is not real, you know. Because the play's outcome is either comedy or, tragedy. So you either expand the moment you think you're a certain idea, there's tragedy as a consequence, and there's comedy as a consequence. You know, comedy is a sort of you going towards more freedom, and the other is you going towards less freedom. But I think, like, honestly, it's like we don't know enough about ourselves, like, here, anybody listening, like, I'll tell you this. Think of this idea here. I'm going to pose a question, right? Somebody asked, why is it that like baby deer is born and it suddenly very quickly knows how to walk and move, you know? But why is it that a human child is born And this child has to be taught how to walk, move, taught how to speak, and all this stuff. And somebody was arguing that it's like, what is this forgetfulness that is in this unique animal that we are for now considering to be the human being, this evolved animal? It's honestly very profound. We're on a giant rock in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of empty space, and we're this biological matter that has somehow found a way to simulate abstract realms, where I have personally concluded that there's a subjective dimension. That means we're just like we have two eyes that see the same. We have a sort of objective dimension and subjective dimension being one moment, right? The subjective dimension is the world behind your eyes. The objective dimension is the world in front of your eyes. And they have a relationship based on your effort and intensity and attention and concentration. You know? I just went into like some flow of kind of sharing that right now. You know? Something I recommend, now that there's people listening, like I'll tell you this, guys. First of all, go buy a stack of printer paper, okay? And put this stack of printer paper, like open it up and put it on this main table you pass by throughout the day. And then also get a bunch of pens, and put the pens beside this, you know? And don't write anything. Just have it there for when you get an idea, not to just type up the idea, to go. The person is trying to find a way where they can advance the architecture of a sentence, aside from also the concept they reveal. So writing is a kind of training your mind to be able to move at different speeds and to have its attention move in different ways, right? Your mind, remember I said it's a bridge, so there's no location, there's nothing, to be honest, called a mind. Like this was a Zen kind of story, like a real Zen story, where in this Zen story, it's about Bodhidharma. Some guy comes up to him and it's like, Bodhidharma's this enlightened guy, right? And so he's like, Bodhidharma, I can't sleep at night. I'm restless. Bodhidharma doesn't listen to the guy. This is details in the story. The guy cuts his hand, looks at Bodhidharma. He's like, Bodhidharma, I'm restless. I don't know why he cuts his hand, but it's said like he did it as a sign of loyalty. And Bodhidharma looked at him and he's like, okay, what is it? Right? And so the guy's like, Bodhidharma, I can't sleep at night. My mind's restless. Please pacify my mind. And Bodhidharma just looks at him and he's like, okay, I'll pacify your mind. But first tell me. But first bring your mind here in front of me and I'll pacify it. And the guy gets shocked. He's like, what? You want me to bring you this mind? Okay. And the guy thinks about it and he's like, oh my God, the mind is not a thing. I can't find it. And he looks at Bodhidharma and it's like, I can't find it. And he says, there, your mind is pacified. And the guy goes into shock. And that shock is said to be some sort of nirvana moment for him, right? And that nirvana moment is very profound because he suddenly realizes he is not what he thought he is. And he is not the result of his mind. That means seldom it is said the mind is not there per se for you to use it, but it's something for you to use for society. It's healthy to have an ego when it's for the benefit of the collective of our species. It's unhealthy to have an ego when it's just you're trying to just have fun in only one way of living. When you realize this world is multidimensional, you embrace change. When you embrace change, you also embrace a changing self and a changing world and the relationship that's between these. And you come to the most profoundest thing, that you're this, like, let's say, transparent orb of consciousness just rolling over different surfaces of reality, different realities. That means deep down within your eyes, before there's any words or sounds, and before there's any movement, there is a silent stillness, and that is it. And there is no heaven,
idea of heaven or anything. It's a silent stillness. You for the first time realize are kind of like an eternal witness of the temporary rather than, the temporary trying to witness the eternal. So that's the kind of experiences I've had, and many other people have had, and I think everybody has it. I think everybody, when they were a child, they were being their true nature. It's just like they just haven't understood to abide with it, or they have, in some sense, not had the courage to change themselves. And the easiest way to have courage to change yourself is by already thinking you've changed yourself. So you're okay with it. You're okay with anything that comes. As if the moment you realize you're an eternal being, your eyes could never close. So fear has in some sense lost its existence. You know? It's very profound. It's as if like one angle is the drop falling from the sky into the ocean, and another angle is kind of like, the whole ocean looking at this drop entering it, right? And so that's the kind of relationship. It's Meister Eckhart, this Christian mystic from 1,000 years ago. He said it like this. He said it, the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. So when man sees God, there is a temporary simulation. When God sees man, it is an eternal simulation, right? And what I mean by that is that it is unconditional when for example, let's say that moment where it's like when God looks at man, that's unconditional. When man looks at God, it's conditional. That means if we try to contemplate the unknown, we have to do it in a certain condition, we think. But the unknown doesn't need any condition. It is as it is. We have to adjust to it, for the survival of our knowledge. So that's the thing, right? Ah, is anyone there still? Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Just realize, like, as much as you put in effort for your for an exploration into greater ways of being physically manifest before the end comes, before the final curtain is pulled, also explore how the mind is being the moment. And you really don't need another teacher. You don't need a meditation technique. You just have to watch your mind as it is happening and realize the watcher is not what's happening, but is watching it. So you detach from the thought and the emotion of the image of reality to, in some sense, kind of get a sense of how, before you think about how your heart should beat, it's beating. It's kind of like that self-realization. You align automatically because you're sincere enough to not push forth when you have to just listen. There's a great term called there's this quote that says you must serve uh, before you can command. Yeah, and so that's a very profound idea. You must serve before you can command, or you must serve in order to command. So something like that, right? That means you got to start from the bottom and go to the top to see all of it. And then when you're there at the top, you wonder where else there's there to go. And it's as if a person has come to a mountain, or let's say an angel has come to a mountain, has walked, climbed up a mountain without using its wings and looks at the skies and is like, okay, the beyond is there, right? So that means it's an ultimate transformation. That means, honestly, at that point, there can be no concept of hope or hopelessness because there's no character trying to reach some sort of success. You become a moment of being as it is. It's like, that's it. So, anyways, guys, thanks for listening. And thanks for engaging in the chat. Because beyond teachers, the teaching
reveals a sort of, again, unconditional surprise. Your moment is your greatest teacher, and it has been there from the beginning. Much blessings and namaste.